She never expected to see him again. Not after the day he humiliated her like she was nothing. He spoke like her dreams were ridiculous, her faith was naive, and her life was small. The crowd heard his arrogance. Heaven heard her silence crack into prayer. But then life turned the tables brutally. The proud man fell hard until no voice remained louder than the void inside him. And while he collapsed, Olivia remained standing, not trending, not defending, just kneeling before God, letting him right what pride tried to bury. Now he's returned carrying the dust of his fall. She never prayed for revenge. She prayed for reinforcement. This is the kind of story where God defends the humble, life corners the proud, and redemption ambushes both. If you're ready for stories that rearrange destinies, grip souls, and flip thrones, subscribe now. Like, comment. God gets the final word. And don't leave. The ending will hit your soul before it hits the screen. Subscribe to receive your next story of redemption and second chances. Olivia was not the kind of woman who drew attention when she walked into a room. People noticed her later when she stayed behind to help clean up. Her beauty was quiet, framed more by kindness than by clothes or makeup. She worked at a small-town café, serving coffee with a gentleness that came from deep faith. To her, faith was not a label, but the way she breathed through ordinary days. She believed God saw her even when people did not. That belief would be the only reason she survived what was coming. Theodore Hale was the kind of man everyone watched the moment he arrived. Success walked in front of him like a spotlight, and confidence marched behind him like a parade. He owned companies, buildings, and the loudest voice in most rooms. People laughed at his jokes even when they were cruel, just to stay close to his power. He had learned young that money could buy silence and imitation respect. What it never bought was character, but he did not care enough to notice. Pride had become his permanent armor. Their lives brushed against each other long before the night everything shattered. Theodore liked the cafe where Olivia worked because the coffee was strong and the service soft. She always greeted him with the same calm smile, no matter how impatient he was. He barely knew her name, but he knew she prayed before eating her own lunch. Once he overheard her saying that God had a purpose for every season. The sentence annoyed him far more than he admitted. To him, purpose meant profit. To her, purpose meant obedience. The annual town gala was supposed to be a celebration, not a battlefield. Lights hung from the ceiling like captured stars, forced to watch human pride perform. The wealthy and influential filled the room, polishing not only shoes but reputations. Olivia was there only because the cafe had been hired to serve desserts. She stayed in the background, carrying trays and quiet prayers through the crowd. Theodore was one of the hosts, moving like he owned not just the building, but the night. That night his voice would try to rewrite her story. Near the end of the evening, the master of ceremonies announced a new segment. They were going to highlight an inspiring local story, which sounded harmless enough. Olivia froze when she heard her own name echo through the speakers. Someone had submitted her story without telling her, mentioning her faith and her dreams. Her heart pounded as dozens of eyes swung in her direction. Theodore stood on the stage with a microphone and a polished smile. He gestured for her to come up like a judge calling a witness. Olivia walked toward the stage with steps that felt heavier than her body. The music faded into a distant hum, drowned out by the sound of her own heartbeat. She whispered, "Lord, be with me," as she climbed the small staircase. The lights seemed too bright, making her feel smaller than ever. Theodore placed a hand on her shoulder in a gesture that looked kind from far away. The crowd clapped politely, expecting something touching and motivational. Olivia stared at the microphone, still unsure why she was there. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Olivia," Theodore began, his tone smooth as glass. "She works at the little cafe down the street and believes God has a great destiny for her life." A few people chuckled softly, thinking he was just warming up. "She says God talks to her while she wipes tables and refills coffee," he added. Laughter rippled through the room, colder this time than the first chuckle. Olivia felt her cheeks burn as her faith became entertainment. Her private conversations with God were turned into public mockery, and it felt like someone had stepped on something sacred. Theodore kept going, emboldened by the reaction he was pulling from the crowd. "She even believes she will impact thousands of lives one day," he said, raising an eyebrow. "Can you imagine that?" he asked, letting the question hang like a punchline. The laughter that followed was sharper, less kind, more hungry. "Maybe with a loyalty card," someone shouted, and more laughter exploded. Theodore smiled, enjoying the feeling of being taller than someone else's dreams. He did not notice the way her hands trembled. Olivia kept her hands clasped tightly in front of her, trying to steady them. She wanted to vanish, to sink through the stage floor and disappear. Fear pressed against her ribs, fighting for space with humiliation. But somewhere beneath the noise, a small defiance still flickered. She remembered late-night prayers whispered over dishes and empty tables. She remembered the sense, however fragile, that God had not forgotten her. "I am still yours," she told him silently. "Even here." "Tell them, Olivia," Theodore said, turning the microphone toward her face. "Tell them how you think God is going to use you." His words were coated in sugar but sharpened like hidden blades. The room went quiet again, hungry for more entertainment at someone else's expense. Olivia stared at the microphone as if it were a weapon, not an invitation. Her throat tightened, her voice locked somewhere between her chest and the ceiling. Finally, she shook her head and whispered, "I don't need to explain myself to you." Theodore laughed into the microphone, stretching out the moment. "See? Even she is shy about her big visions," he said, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Maybe God needs to hire her a louder marketing team." A few people laughed again out of habit rather than conviction. Others shifted in their seats, uneasy, but still silent. Olivia's eyes shimmered, but her tears refused to fall in front of them. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand there and not run. The host eventually stepped in and moved the program along. Applause rose, then faded, and the music started up again as if nothing had happened. Olivia walked off the stage as calmly as her shaking legs allowed. No one reached for her arm or asked if she was all right. People drifted back to their food and conversations, eager to get comfortable again. Comfort is almost always chosen over courage in rooms like that. She slipped through a side door, searching for somewhere to break in peace. Behind the main hall, she found a quiet corridor with dim lights and empty walls. The muffled sounds of music and laughter felt cruelly far away. Olivia leaned against the wall, then slowly slid down until she was sitting on the floor. Her hands covered her face as the first sob finally tore free. "God, that hurt," she whispered, dropping all attempts to sound strong. She did not try to dress her pain in pretty religious language. She simply told him the truth about how small and foolish she felt. Tears streamed down her face, hot and unedited. The scene replayed in her mind like a cruel loop. The laughter, the smirks, the microphone. For a moment, shame tried to settle over her like a heavy cloak. Then a verse she had read earlier that week rose to the surface of her memory. "Those who look to him are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame," it said. The words did not erase the pain, but they challenged the verdict spoken over her. "They laughed at me, but they did not name me," she whispered. She took a deep, shaky breath and wiped her face with the back of her hand. Her body still trembled, but something in her spirit straightened. "If you still have a purpose for me, use even this," she prayed quietly. It was not a dramatic declaration meant for an audience. It was a raw surrender offered from a hallway most people would never see. She stood up slowly, using the wall to steady herself. Heaven measured that rise more carefully than any standing ovation in the ballroom. While Olivia was gathering herself, Theodore had already moved on to the next conversation. He did not think about the damage he had done. He only remembered the sound of the crowd. To him, it had been just another clever moment, another story to tell later. Pride is skilled at celebrating while someone else bleeds. He did not feel convicted, only entertained. He did not know that heaven had already recorded his words like seeds. And seeds eventually return as harvests, whether we expect them or not. Olivia left the gala early, stepping out into the cool night air. The sky above the town stretched wide and indifferent to human applause. She wrapped her arms around herself, partly from the chill and partly from the ache. "You saw me," she told God softly as she walked toward home. You heard every word, even the ones I could not say out loud. The humiliation throbbed like a fresh bruise, but she refused to let it define her name. I am who you say I am, not who he made me feel like tonight, she reminded herself. Later, lying in bed, she stared at the ceiling in the dark. The images from the stage replayed again and again in her mind. Each replay cut a little deeper into her confidence, yet each whispered prayer stitched a little more strength back into her soul. Heal me, but also use this, she prayed, voice hoarse from crying. Do not waste my pain. Somewhere else in town, Theodore slept soundly, unaware, but stories do not end where people fall asleep. God was already planning a return she never expected. Theodore slept soundly that night, feeling powerful and unquestioned. He had humiliated her publicly and crowned himself internally with no conviction in his chest. To him, words were weapons that vanished once spoken. But heaven keeps receipts the world never sees. By morning, his triumph felt intact, until life began to ask its own questions. Pride walked beside him like a shadow, and shadows grow longer right before the fall. 3 months later, the first crack appeared in his empire. A contract worth millions was canceled without explanation or ceremony. The town blamed markets and trends, assuming business death was just math. But this was not math. It was eviction of identity. Theodore held buildings, assets, influence, polished stages, but he did not hold foundations in God, and anything without roots can be shaken into dust quickly. The second crack came like a betrayal disguised as strategy. His most trusted partner leaked internal documents to competitors for profit. The town gasped, stunned that success could bleed from such altitude. They called it treason. Life called it harvest. Because whatever you sow eventually receives your name back. He had sown humiliation. Now humiliation was sowing him. He tried to speak loudly to investors, leaders, and boardrooms again. But loud voices carry no authority when truth leaves the room first. My reputation has never failed me, he insisted, unaware of his own denial. Reputation had not left him yet. Identity was leaving first. Investors began to avoid his calls. Mirrors began to confront his nights. For the first time, he feared paralysis of narrative, not paralysis of numbers. The third month ended with his company announcing layoffs. Not one or two, hundreds, including entire departments. The town labeled it temporary restructuring. But Theodore felt the bleeding internally permanent. Success was leaking out. Influence was retreating inward. Faith was absent because faith had always sounded like resume accessory, not foundation. This collapse was no intern. This collapse was mirror. One night, sitting in the floor of his empty office, he felt silence hit like a louder gavel than applause ever was. He rubbed his temples aggressively, trying to stop the noise that wasn't noise. It was conscience knocking. God lets silence do what speeches never did. Conviction doesn't shout. It waits, sits beside you, corners you eventually. He had been cornered enough socially. Now he was being cornered spiritually. God, if you're really there, rewrite the part of me I never let anyone read. He whispered. It was brave enough to be prayer, honest enough to break ego, daring enough to anger shame internally. But shame angers heaven only until humility bends low enough for identity to be handed back. He didn't bend at first. He described his bleeding to God, and bleeding described to God is a signature begging for courtroom later. The fourth month began with eviction notices, not on his home, on his name's permanence. Bills stacked unopened, calls marked unanswered, deals bled into interruptions, partnerships fled from conversation first before apology gained permission. He once built legends. Now he was building revision without spotlights. Spotlights don't kneel, but reputations do when attachments evaporate. Meanwhile, Olivia kept working quietly at the café, unaware of heaven scripting a narrative reversal they would later meet. Theodore dreaded nightfall, because nightfall brought mirrors and no applause. He dreaded meetings because meetings asked him to speak without crowns. He dreaded relevance because relevance was not resume. It was altar. He dreaded his open Bible because Bible opened not like a script now, like mirror. He dreaded, until dread became last chair for humility to sit instead of apology. One afternoon, he finally walked into the boardroom again, quieter now, as if his footsteps had aged years instead of months. He tried to speak, but words felt ash-like and dry. "Processo costs," life whispered back. "Cost me too," his interior whispered upward. But humility costs daily comfort until identity is rewritten by heaven, violently slow, socially irrelevant without dust settling over microphoneless narrative theology, not market math. He needed truth more than microphone now. The first investor told him, "Your crown is heavy, your roots are light." The second murmured, "You built rooms, not refuge." Theodore stared without blinking, hearing truth for the first time without defense. Defense had never saved him anyway. Not truly. Now refusal no longer echoed in corridors of apologies he tried to use once to bury her meaning. Meaning wasn't trending publicly yet. Meaning was trending her. "Where is she now?" someone asked during dinner at a local restaurant. Theodore flinched, hearing the name Olivia Parker, like someone finally remembering a case file with no appeal hearing he had once weaponized into stage entertainment. "That's not her verdict," heaven insisted again quietly. Heaven doesn't archive wounds, it archives altars. Olivia Parker would later bloom into forte emotionally, surrendered upward into humility. He didn't know that yet. He only knew her name was trending, haunting him without protocol anymore. The fifth crack came like a warning sign blinking red internally. He didn't mock faith publicly this time. Life mocked his crowns privately. Private mockery is still mockery until humility carves revision slower than apology. Water dripped investor pressure, but Prohesi's wings fold destination where hearts wrestle not publicly, but intimately. He was being refined violently slow in unwatched nights. No partner, and only God pen. Meanwhile, Olivia Parker's silence echoed like wind through empty small-town gala corridors, where God drafts future courtroom signatures we didn't expect to hear. Small chairs unexamined by platforms, investors once stood tall, now shrink inwardly, hearts fold into humility seeds trending spiritual gavel without applause. Doorframe Batclus finally not by voice but by altar. Prayers shape legacy. Not reputation layers life restructured him. But heaven harvested her roots. Humility carves courage slower, but deeper. Bible pages illumined what pride tried to bury. Apology was no entrance. Presence returned as prophecy without notice. Heaven filed responsibility, not revenge. Story unchecked is not closure. Closure kneels when God denies duplicate endings. Her wound became seed, not tombstone. And return bends where regret ages into truth finally begs to be rewritten inward, not outward, until humility bows low enough to receive voice again. Olivia didn't archive resentment, so retaliation had no voice to partner with narrative corruption economically without heaven involvement first. Theodore had never lost, because losing was not economic negotiation now. Losing was existential doorframe. And doorframes exposed role, not resume. Theodore was exposed internally. Olivia Parker was ongoing eternally even when town forgot her steps. Life flipped him violently slow until humility began to beg without crowns. Not because of shame, trending protocols. Loops interior, strong altars, seeds unseen. Returned partners fled. God wrote reconciliation, not revenge, humility. Beau's sleep office, café, flower bouquets, corridors, investors' table results, Bible pages, divine receipts. The courtroom chapter knocked, year stage resumed, where souls refuse irrelevant trending economics collapse. But heaven rewrites only when identity bleeds. Enough silence, cornering his timeline. The 6th month ended not like gossip, like grace rewriting socially irrelevant with no crowns on mic, but tear-stained Bibles open inwardly. He didn't know that humility would be his rebound. He only knew rebound would be at her door. And God was sharpening intersection. Careful enough to hurt, loud enough for redemption, slow enough for every narrative to collapse into meaning. Until meaning received his name back without negotiations. Olivia Parker was heating tea and rearranging simple bouquets where ego once tried presence. Shareholder trending economics collapse. God invests plot. not resumes. Nothing can be shaken without roots. Value is not. Resume is not identity carved, slow-bowed Susan. Heavenly receipts, humble hearts, bending bravery, small stairs, small towns, unwatched events. Companies collapse, God's pen. Timed, not protocols, inverse king hearts, not impact, social rhetoric, equity fort later. Humility collision. Finished laughter first. Baptist sentiment, city forgot her steps, he forgot apology. But faith reinstalled, not theater, invite, prophecy. Do everyday, God writes, slow pan. That fall began where success once was thrown. That fall ended where humility finally learned to kneel. And kneeling learned without applause is the most aggressive language of redemption life ever writes, or God ever agrees to conclude. Months passed, and the night of the gala slowly turned from open wound into a scar. It still ached when touched, but it no longer bled every time she remembered. Olivia poured coffee, wiped tables, and prayed over strangers quietly. Her life looked ordinary from the outside, but inside she was rebuilding with God. She learned to laugh again, though sometimes it sounded slightly guarded. The word humiliation no longer owned her name, but it still sat in the background. She thought that chapter was closed for good. Sometimes when the café was empty and the lights were soft, the memory replayed. The crowd, the laughter, the microphone turned into a weapon. Her cheeks would warm with the echo of shame that once felt permanent. But then, another memory would rise. That quiet hallway, that whispered prayer. She would remember how God met her when no one else did. Use even this, she had prayed, not knowing how expensive that request was. She had no idea God was still answering it. On the other side of town, Theodore was living a life no one expected for him. He had moved into a smaller apartment, stripped of luxury and noise. Meetings were fewer now, and most of them were uncomfortable. He found himself sitting alone more often, face lit only by a small lamp and an open Bible. At first he read out of desperation, not devotion. But somewhere between guilt and exhaustion, hunger was born. He wanted something success had never given him. Peace. One night, after another long battle with his own conscience, he felt a nudge. It wasn't a voice he heard out loud, but it was stronger than a thought. Go back to where you broke her, it seemed to say. Not to defend yourself, but to tell the truth. The idea made his stomach twist with dread and shame. He didn't feel ready. He didn't feel worthy. But obedience isn't about feeling ready. It's about hearing and moving anyway. The next morning he dressed simply, almost unrecognizable to his old self. No designer suit, no sharp tie, no expensive watch catching the light. Just jeans, a plain shirt, and a jacket that had seen better days. He walked toward the cafe with steps that felt heavier than any boardroom entrance. The bell over the door chimed as he pushed it open. The smell of fresh coffee and baked bread rushed toward him. For a moment he almost turned and walked back out. Olivia was behind the counter, wiping a mug with a faded towel. She didn't look up at first. The sound of the bell was too familiar to notice. "Good morning, I'll be right with you," she said, voice steady and warm. When she finally lifted her eyes, time stuttered. The rag slipped slightly in her hand as she froze mid-motion. The man standing by the door looked smaller, older, quieter. But she knew exactly who he was. For a heartbeat, the cafe disappeared and the ballroom returned. She saw flashes of bright lights and heard phantom echoes of cruel laughter. Her chest tightened, like a fist had wrapped around her ribs. She could have pretended not to recognize him, but that would have been a lie. So she did the only thing she knew to do when fear rose. She took a breath and whispered silently, "God, I am still yours even now." Then she placed the mug down carefully and straightened her shoulders. Theodore saw the recognition in her eyes and almost panicked. Shame washed over him so violently he felt slightly dizzy. "I shouldn't have come," he thought, the instinct to flee screaming in his mind. Yet his feet stayed planted, as if nailed to the floor. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, words evaporating. He had rehearsed apologies alone, but they felt small in front of her. Finally, he managed to say her name, Olivia. Just one word, but it landed between them like a confession. She swallowed hard, steadying herself with one hand on the counter. "Good morning," she answered, her tone neutral but not cruel. What can I get you? The normal question felt strange in such an abnormal moment. Still, normal was safer than letting the past rush in uncontrolled. Just coffee, he said, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. Black is fine. He sounded nothing like the man who once used his voice as a weapon. There was no show, no command, no theatrics, only a tired honesty that made her uneasy in a different way. Change is disorienting when you've built walls against who someone used to be. She turned to fill the cup, grateful for the brief chance to look away. The few customers scattered around the café began to take notice. This was a small town. Faces never really stayed anonymous. Whispers started like soft wind in the corners of the room. "Is that Theodore Hale?" someone murmured behind a newspaper. "What's he doing here?" another voice added. Olivia felt the weight of their curiosity pressing on her back. She silently begged God not to let this become another spectacle. She set the cup in front of him, the porcelain clinking softly on the counter. "That will be $2.50, she said, keeping her eyes on the register for a moment. He handed her the money with slightly shaking fingers. "Thank you," he replied, but the words sounded heavier than the transaction deserved. He didn't reach for his coffee right away. "Olivia, do you have a minute?" he asked carefully. The question hung in the air like a test. She hesitated, torn between instinct and obedience. Every part of her that remembered the stage wanted to say no, but the part of her that had surrendered that night to God whispered wait. She glanced at the clock. The morning rush was still a few minutes away. "I have 5, she answered, setting a boundary like a fence, not a wall. "We can talk at the corner table." She motioned toward a small table near the window, slightly away from prying ears. They sat across from each other, the table suddenly feeling too small. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Theodore stared into his coffee as if searching for courage at the bottom of the cup. "I don't deserve to be sitting here," he began finally. "I know that. I came because I can't carry what I did to you in silence anymore. I needed to face the person I broke." Olivia did not rush to fill the silence that followed. Her fingers traced the edge of her own empty cup, grounding herself in the simple motion. "I won't pretend it didn't mark me," she said softly. "That night stayed with me for a long time. I questioned my worth, my calling, and even my sanity after you laughed at my faith." Her voice didn't shake this time. It carried weight, not fragility. "This is the first time I've ever told you that out loud." Theodore's eyes glistened and he didn't look away. "I was cruel," he admitted, the words landing like stones on his own chest. "I treated your faith like a joke because it threatened my pride. I used you as a prop so I could feel more powerful in front of people. I am so deeply sorry, Olivia." No microphone, no crowd, no polite version of this. Just me, finally saying what I should have said the same night I hurt you. She breathed in slowly, letting the apology sink in without rushing to accept or reject it. "I forgave you before you ever came back," she told him, surprising him and herself. "That night, in a hallway no one saw, I gave what you did to God. I didn't do that for you. I did it so bitterness wouldn't own me. But forgiveness doesn't mean trust automatically returns. Trust walks slower than forgiveness and asks more questions. I don't know yet what to do with you now." Theodore nodded, not arguing, not begging, just receiving. "I'm not here to ask you for trust," he said gently. "I'm here because God wouldn't let me hide from the damage I caused. If this conversation is all I ever get, I'll be grateful for it." She studied him for a long moment, seeing both the man who hurt her and the man being rebuilt. "Then we start here," she replied quietly. She never expected to see him again, but God had just opened a door neither of them deserved. Olivia did not sleep well that night. The conversation replayed in her mind like a movie stuck on repeat. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him sitting across from her at that small table. Not as the man on the stage, but as the one staring into his coffee, trembling. It confused her more than it comforted her. Pain was easier to manage when the villain stayed a villain. Change complicated the story in ways her heart was not ready for. The next morning, the cafe felt strangely louder. Chairs scraped, cups clinked, milk steamed, but it was her mind making the real noise. She moved through her routines with practiced motions and unsettled thoughts. How do you treat someone who once mocked your faith but now fears God? She wondered. She had no handbook for this kind of intersection. All she had was scripture, prayer, and a heart that still ached. And for now, that would have to be enough. She half expected him to stay away after their conversation. Part of her hoped he would. Distance was simpler, safer, easier to explain to herself. But another part, buried deep beneath her caution, whispered something else. If God had started a work in him, who was she to decide the cutoff point? That whisper did not erase her boundaries, but it softened their edges. Faith does not always erase fear. Sometimes it just refuses to obey it. 2 days later, the bell over the door chimed again. Olivia glanced up and felt her stomach tighten. Theodore stood there holding a paper bag and 2 coffees. He looked almost apologetic just for existing in the doorway. "I know you did not ask me to come back," he said quietly, "and if you tell me to leave, I will. But I brought breakfast if you will let me say thank you for listening." She stared at him for a moment, measuring not his words but his posture. There was no entitlement in his tone, no expectation in his eyes. Just a nervous hope and a quiet readiness to accept rejection. "Leave the bag on the counter," she replied, keeping her voice even. "You can sit for a few minutes before the rush starts." It was not an invitation into her life, only into the room, and that difference mattered more than he knew. He obeyed immediately, placing the bag down as if it were something fragile. Then he chose the same corner table, almost like he was afraid to change anything. Olivia finished serving another customer before joining him. She sat with her back straight, hands resting lightly on the table. "Why are you really here?" she asked, not unkindly, but without sugar. "I meant what I said," he answered. "I do not want to hide any more from the damage I caused." He reached into the bag and pulled out a simple pastry. "I remember you always choosing the cheapest thing on the menu at the gala," he said. "You acted like you preferred it, but I know now it was about money." The observation made her cheeks warm. She hated being seen in her vulnerability. Still, there was no mockery in his voice now, only grief. "I used to think humility was just lack of options," he continued softly. "Now I know it is a choice I never made, until everything was taken from me." Olivia listened without rushing to respond. She had spent years speaking to God about her pain. She did not owe fast words to anyone else. "I do not need you to over-explain your fall," she said gently. "I am not rooting for your punishment like some people are. But I am protecting my heart and I will not pretend nothing happened. You are changing, yes, but you are also the person who once humiliated me. I have to hold both truths at the same time." He nodded slowly, accepting the tension instead of fighting it. "For a long time I thought consequences were cruelty," he admitted. "Now I see they were mercy dressed in rough clothes. If all of this had not happened, I would still be that man on the stage. I would still think your faith was something to joke about. I would still think I owned every room I walked into. And I would still be empty, but too proud to notice." A small group of regulars walked in, and Olivia instinctively glanced toward the counter. "I need to get back to work," she said, rising halfway from her chair. "I understand," he replied, already pushing his own chair back. "You do not owe me time, but if God ever lets me repair anything, I will show up to do it. I am not asking for a place in your life. I am asking for a chance to walk in truth even if it is outside your door." Later that afternoon, she noticed he had stayed to help a stranger. An elderly woman dropped her bag near the door, papers spilling everywhere. Before Olivia could step out from behind the counter, Theodore was already kneeling. He gathered every page with careful hands, speaking to the woman with respect. No one else seemed impressed. The moment was too small for applause. But smallness was exactly what impressed heaven. Olivia watched, conflicted, as character replaced showmanship. That evening, alone in her small apartment, she replayed the day again. She sat on the edge of her bed with her Bible open on her lap. "God, what are you doing?" she whispered honestly. "You know I forgave him, but I do not know how to coexist with him. I do not want to become the judge of his journey, but I do not want to be reckless either." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she closed her eyes. Please do not let my heart move faster than your will. She flipped to a passage she had underlined long before any of this. Love keeps no record of wrongs, it read, in ink that now felt prophetic. She frowned, tracing the verse with her fingertip. Keeping no record does not mean pretending the wrong never happened, she murmured. It means refusing to weaponize it every time I feel afraid. Her fear was real, but so was the transformation she had started to see. She asked God to help her tell the difference between discernment and pure self-protection. Over the next weeks, Theodore's visits became cautious but consistent. Sometimes he only stayed long enough to buy a coffee and say good morning. Sometimes he helped carry boxes without being asked. Other times he wiped tables after closing wordlessly like a quiet apology in motion. He never pushed for long conversations, never asked to sit where she had not invited him. It was as if he had finally learned that presence is more powerful than pressure. Olivia found herself watching what he did more than listening to what he said. The town, of course, had its own theories. People loved building stories out of glimpses and guesses. "Did you hear Theodore is always at the café now?" someone whispered at the grocery store. "I bet he is trying to buy his way back into her life," another replied. Olivia heard some of it, and it stung more than she wanted to admit. Being seen with him meant reopening a public conversation she never asked for. Once again, her story was being discussed in rooms she did not enter. One afternoon, after a long rush, she finally addressed him directly. "If you being here starts to hurt my witness or my healing, I will ask you to stop coming," she said. She looked him in the eyes when she said it, not blinking. He did not flinch, did not roll his eyes, did not defend himself. "Then I will stop," he answered simply. "I would rather disappear again than become another wound. That is the one thing I never want to be in your story again." Her shoulders relaxed a little at his answer, though she did not fully understand why. It was the first time she believed he might actually honor a no. People who once abused power rarely learned to live under boundaries. Yet, here he was, accepting them like guardrails, not chains. "God, I see fruit," she admitted quietly that night in prayer. "I do not know what you are building, but I see fruit. And fruit is harder to argue with than feelings." That night, as she turned off the cafe lights and locked the door, she paused. She glanced back at the little corner table by the window. Months ago, humiliation had tried to bury her voice on a stage. Now, in this small room, God was rewriting that narrative one uneasy conversation at a time. She did not suddenly trust him, and she was not in love with him. But she could not deny that he had come back different. And different was exactly where God likes to start new chapters. Forgiveness had once been a prayer whispered in a dark hallway after the gala. Back then, it felt like a single moment. A decision made with shaking hands. Now, sitting across from Theodore on random mornings, Olivia realized something new. Forgiveness was not a moment. It was a road. Some days, the road felt smooth and holy. Other days, it felt like walking barefoot over broken glass. And every step still required God more than it required her feelings. She noticed the small things first, the ones no one else would have cared about. Theodore no longer interrupted people when they spoke. He let customers go ahead of him in line without rolling his eyes. He picked up trash others left behind without pointing it out for praise. When someone blamed the economy for his downfall, he did not defend himself. He simply said, "I made choices that had consequences," and left it there. There was a quiet ownership in him that scared her more than his arrogance ever had. Arrogance was easy to hate. It made him clearly the enemy. But humility, real humility, made room for something else. It made room for compassion. And compassion was dangerous to a heart still healing. Compassion could tempt her to move faster than wisdom, faster than God. So she watched both him and herself carefully, like a guard watching over a gate. The gate was her heart, and she had no intention of leaving it unguarded again. One morning, he arrived before the cafe fully opened. Olivia was still setting chairs down and arranging pastries in the display. He stood outside instead of walking in, waiting until she flipped the sign. When she unlocked the door, he lifted a small box awkwardly. I brought these," he said. Inside were fresh flowers from a vendor outside town. ones she usually could not afford. "I thought your shop deserved something beautiful you didn't have to budget for." She stared at the flowers, then at him. Part of her was moved, part of her was defensive. "Beauty is not what I'm missing," she said softly, though not unkindly. "I'm missing safety." The words surprised even her as they came out. Theodore swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "I can't fix that," he replied, "but I can try to never be the reason you feel unsafe again." She took the flowers and set them on the counter, not as acceptance, but as acknowledgement. "Thank you," she said, because politeness still mattered to her. "I don't know what God is doing with you," she added, "but I see He is doing something. That doesn't erase what happened. It just means I won't pretend He isn't working, even if I'm still hurting." A strange relief flickered through his eyes, like honesty had given him room to breathe. "I would rather you say that than pretend to be comfortable," he answered. The town, of course, developed its own version of events. Some said Theodore was trying to manipulate Olivia with his new religious angle. Others believed he was after sympathy now that power was gone. Very few considered the possibility that God was actually dealing with both of them. Rumors moved faster than truth, as they often do. Olivia heard pieces of their conversations in grocery aisles and church parking lots. She decided her obedience to God had to be louder in her soul than their opinions. On Sundays, Olivia still sat in her usual pew at church. For weeks, Theodore avoided the building, feeling unworthy of going. But one morning, she looked up during worship and saw him slip quietly into the back row. He did not speak, did not respond to anyone, did not perform. He stood during songs with his hands open, not raised, just open, like someone who had finally stopped clenching his fists around his own life. She turned her eyes back to the front and whispered, "Lord, this is your story too." That afternoon, they crossed paths again at the café. "I didn't know you went there," he said, referring to the church. "I didn't know you would show your face in that room," she replied honestly. He nodded, no offense taken. "I didn't either," he admitted, "until I realized I was more afraid of facing God than of facing people. And I've already seen what happens when I keep Him at a distance. I don't want that life anymore." Her chest tightened at his words because they reminded her of her own prayers, the ones she had whispered right after the gala, when her face was streaked with tears. She hadn't asked God to ruin him. She'd asked Him not to waste what had happened. Watching him now, she wondered in fear and awe if this was part of the answer. "Be careful," she warned herself silently. Answers to prayer can still hurt if you hold them the wrong way. She leaned harder on God in those days than she ever had before. One evening, as they wiped tables after closing, he broke the silence. "Do you ever wish that night had never happened?" he asked. She paused, considering the question with more honesty than he expected. "Yes," she said first because that was true. Then she surprised them both by continuing. "And no," she added quietly, "because it changed me in ways comfort never would have. I just hate that it had to be you who delivered the pain." Theodore set the cloth down and leaned his weight on the back of a chair. "I hate that too," he said. "If I could go back, I would rather lose my company earlier than wound you like that." The sentence landed heavier than any financial loss he had described. "Theodore," she replied, "you can't rewrite that night, but you can decide who you're going to be because of it, and so can I." There were days when her heart softened toward him, and she almost forgot the stage. Then something small would trigger the memory again, and her guard would snap back up. A tone in his voice, a joke said too quickly, a look from someone watching them talk. On those days, she felt guilty for doubting his change. "Maybe I'm being unfair," she would think. Then another part of her would answer, "No, you're being honest." Healing rarely walks in straight lines. She started talking to God differently about him. Not just "Lord, heal me," but "Lord, lead him." "Don't let his change be shallow or convenient," she prayed. "Either make it real or let it fall apart so I can see the truth clearly." She did not ask God to bring them together. She asked Him to keep them both from lying to themselves. That, she decided, was a better prayer than any fairy tale ending. For his part, Theodore stopped asking God to fix his reputation. Instead, he started asking Him to fix his character. "Break whatever in me made it easy to hurt her," he prayed one night. Don't just change what people see, change what you see. It was the most dangerous prayer he had ever prayed. Dangerous because God listens very closely to that kind of request. Dangerous because it meant surrender, not negotiation. As weeks turned into months, something unexpected happened. Olivia stopped thinking about him only as the man who humiliated me. She started seeing him also as the man God is confronting. She didn't excuse his past, but she started to hold it with open hands. Her heart slowly loosened its grip on the right to stay angry forever, not because he deserved relief, but because she refused to live chained to that night. She was not built to be a museum of hurt. She was built to be a testimony of grace. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped low behind the buildings, she watched him lock up the café after helping her close. He handed her the keys without making a joke, without forcing a moment. "Thank you for letting me help," he said simply. There was no weight on the words, no expectation attached, just gratitude, plain and unadorned. "Good night, Theodore," she replied, feeling oddly at peace. And for the first time, the word night didn't feel like a replay of the gala. As she walked home, Olivia realized something had shifted. Forgiveness was no longer just a yes she had given God years ago. It was now a path she was walking one step at a time. Some steps hurt, some steps healed, some steps simply existed. But she was moving, not stuck. And somewhere between his repentance and her reluctance, God was quietly writing redemption. Neither of them knew where the road would lead, but heaven did, and that was enough for now. The first real test of whatever God was building came quietly, disguised as an opportunity. One afternoon, a former associate of Theodore walked into the café, wearing an expensive suit and a restless smile. He greeted Theodore with the old confidence of someone who still remembered his former glory. "Rumor says you've gone soft," the man joked, glancing around the simple shop. "We've got a project starting again, smaller this time, but solid. We could use your brain, if you're done playing barista." The words seemed harmless, but Olivia felt the tension instantly. Theodore's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, like an old reflex trying to wake up. For a brief second, Olivia saw a flicker of the man from the stage, not in his words, but in the way his posture straightened with the taste of importance. The associate kept talking, describing numbers, influence, doors reopening. "We can get you back where you belong," he said smoothly. "Far away from this." His hand waved lightly at the cafe, as if it were a downgrade, not a mercy. Olivia watched from behind the counter, pretending to wipe a clean surface. She was not eavesdropping. The conversation was simply loud enough to reach her. Part of her stomach knotted in dread, afraid of seeing Theodore slip back into old patterns. Another part of her whispered, "God, this is not my test, it's his." She remembered her own prayers. Either make his change real, or let it fall apart. Tests were part of that request. Whether she liked it or not, she forced herself not to interfere, not to rescue, not to control. Theodore listened, but his eyes occasionally drifted toward Olivia. He could see the careful way she kept her distance while staying present. It reminded him that someone had watched his cruelty and still chosen forgiveness. "Money, visibility, the old circles," his associate continued, like a salesman offering redemption in the wrong currency. "You don't have to stay buried here." The phrase landed wrong this time, because for the first time Theodore knew he hadn't been buried. He'd been planted. "I appreciate the offer," Theodore said slowly. His voice did not carry the hunger it once did, only measured thought. "But I'm not the same man who walked into your boardroom a year ago." The associate laughed, assuming it was modesty. "No one is the same, Theo, but the game is the game. I can help you win again. That's what friends are for." Theodore shook his head gently, surprising himself with how steady it felt. "I wasn't winning," he replied, eyes calm. "I was loud, not whole. I hurt people I should have protected, mocked faith I now desperately depend on. I don't want the life that made that version of me possible. Not unless God drags me into something different than what we used to build. Right now, he has me here." The associate frowned, momentarily thrown off script. "You're seriously choosing this?" he asked, glancing again at the simple decor. Theodore followed his gaze but saw something entirely else. He saw the table where he had offered his first honest apology, the corner where he had wiped floors without cameras, the counter where Olivia had told him she forgave him, but still guarded her heart. "Yes," he said finally. "I'm choosing this season, because God put me in it." The older life walked out the door with a frustrated shrug and a promise to check in later. As the bell chimed behind him, the cafe felt strangely lighter. Olivia exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She didn't clap or congratulate Theodore. She just walked over slowly and placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of him. "No charge," she said. "Tests are exhausting." He smiled, a soft, tired smile that reached deeper than his face. "You heard all of that, didn't you?" he asked, though he already knew. "Enough to know you had a choice," she replied. "And that for once you didn't choose the room that clapped the loudest." He nodded, fingers wrapping around the warm cup. "I used to think doors proved God's favor," he said quietly. "Now I think some doors are traps with nice handles." As days turned into another month, the future started asking louder questions. "What are we now?" her friends asked one evening over dinner. "Just a woman and a man learning to walk in the same town again," Olivia answered carefully. "Has he changed?" they pressed. "Yes," she admitted, "but he is still responsible for what he did. And I am still responsible for how far I let him back in." Boundaries became not just lines, but prayers. At church, some people celebrated what looked like a miracle in progress. Others wondered quietly why she would even allow him near her life again. A few spiritualized their discomfort and called it discernment, without ever praying about it. Olivia listened, but she refused to let opinions become her compass. She had learned the hard way that crowds can cheer for the wrong person. She chose to listen for the quieter voice, the one that had never humiliated her, the voice of the shepherd who had walked with her through the valley first. One evening after closing, Theodore lingered by the door, hesitant. "Olivia," he said, his tone more serious than usual, "I need to ask you something hard." She braced herself, heart instantly on alert. "If this is about us," she began, but he held up a hand gently. "It's not," he said. "At least not like that. It's about calling." He pulled out a folded piece of paper from his pocket and placed it on the counter. "I've been thinking about starting something new," he explained. "Not another empire. Not a company built on pride. A community project, business mentoring, scholarships, practical help for kids like I once pretended not to see. I don't trust myself to lead it alone. I don't trust the old version of me at all. So I wanted to ask if you would pray about being part of it." Her fingers hovered over the paper but didn't touch it yet. "You want me to work with you," she said slowly, clarifying aloud. "I want you to work with the vision," he corrected gently, "and to hold me accountable to the God behind it. That doesn't mean we become anything other than co-laborers. I'm not asking for your heart, I'm asking for your honesty. And if your answer is no, I will still go where God leads, just more carefully." The offer both terrified and intrigued her. On one hand, it sounded like a trap her emotions might walk into half-healed. On the other, it sounded eerily similar to the dreams she had once whispered to God. Dreams of helping people see their worth, of being part of something bigger than herself. "Lord, is this restoration or distraction?" she prayed silently. She did not answer Theodore right away. Instead, she folded the paper and slipped it into her apron. That night at home, she spread the paper out on her kitchen table. It wasn't a contract. It was a rough sketch full of scribbles and question marks. Ideas for workshops, mentorship programs, practical support for broken families. Nothing glamorous, nothing polished, just need and possibility. Her heart ached at the sight of it. In that strange way, hope can hurt. "This looks a lot like the things I thought you would use me for," she told God. "I just never imagined his name would be anywhere near them." She went back to the same psalm that had carried her through before. "Those who look to him are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame." Radiant, she repeated softly. Not rushed, not reckless, not naive. Radiant. The next morning, she walked into the cafe with the paper in her hand and resolve in her chest. Theodore looked up, immediately noticing the decision on her face. "I will pray with you about this," she said, placing the paper on the counter between them. I will ask God if he wants me in this, not my guilt or your regret. And if he says yes, there will be rules, boundaries, and a lot of uncomfortable honesty. His shoulders relaxed as if that was the best answer he could have hoped for. Between them, the future did not look simple, but it finally looked surrendered. The mentoring project began to grow legs, but not wings yet. Theodore worked obsessively, not for applause, but for proof. Proof that God had truly taken the pen from his pride. Olivia watched the growth carefully, like a gardener inspecting roots, not bouquets. The town still whispered his humiliation louder than his change, but heaven whispered his direction louder than both combined. The project meetings were held in an abandoned community hall near the river. Dusty floors, sagging ceiling fan, chipped paint on old wooden benches. Not glamorous, but loud spiritually. This was the place where humility feels honest, because nobody claps for markers. Olivia pinned a schedule board on the wall, each date dedicated to a prayer, not a speech. Theodore arrived early, always early, unlocking doors, carrying chairs, sweeping silence into purpose. Purpose has no accent, only witnesses. The initial workshop flopped by human metrics. Only 12 women attended. No viral moment, no trending numbers, no applause. Olivia smiled anyway, because faith is not impressed by attendance. Attendance is impressed by posture, and posture was bowing slowly in Theodore's heart as he listened to forgotten voices speak through stories he once thought unworthy. No result is wasted when God registers the beginning, she whispered. Theodore looked at the empty chairs afterward and frowned slightly. I expected impact, he admitted. You expected rooms, Olivia responded quickly, correcting the narrative. God expects obedience, but obedience doesn't always explode instantly into influence. It sometimes implodes first, and implosions stubbornly quiet are also plot twists. Olivia prayed with her hands open over cold coffee that afternoon. The ones that used to carry trays of silence at the gala now carried psalm-marked guilty announcements without apologies. Her heart didn't idolatrize project anymore. It tested hearts instead. God does not need grand speeches. God needs grand truth. Grand truth makes humble people guardians, not survivors. She was guardian. The enemy arrived not with a suit this time, but with gossip. A local influencer posted a picture of Theodore and Olivia at the community hall setup. The caption screamed, "Humiliator seeks sympathy." Theodore winced reading that line. Olivia knelt instantly, reading that caption as mirror, not verdict. What are you doing? Her soul asked heaven again. Heaven answered without protocols. You will be tempted to rush into defense. Olivia prayed silently after reading the post. But defense never rebuilds identity lost. Only truth rebuilds speakers. Theodore read the influencer's accusations but felt shame peel inward instead of audience flipping applause signs he once worshipped. You can bleach resumes, but you can't Photoshop altars, she whispered. He did not respond angrily to the post. He responded privately to God. One afternoon, a young mother stood up during the second workshop. Her baby on her hip, eyes shining like small suns breaking clouds. Sir, thank you for choosing truth when you didn't have to, the young mother said emotionally toward Theodore. You reminded me that God can still use someone who once hurt. Theodore swallowed like a testimony, choking his throat, but stable a few months later after apartment evictions and flower leasing deals, imploring, not because he deserved release, but because narrative didn't need exchange. God invests plot care, moist morning pastry budget sheet answers have no protocols, chapters bleed where pride once knelt. Father importance humility echo economically, but existentially. Heaven archived altars, not apologies, restructured markets, equival equity signatures, surrender, not tombstones. She sat. God was watching his interior. The project could have ended being tiny, socially impressive moment, but tiny, impressive moments grow personalities, not legacy. And legacy demands truth tall enough to bend downward. Olivia prayed alone those nights, wanting to disappear from public protocol but remain broadcast inward. Eternal revision, entire project became impossible to budget. Apocalypse return, front-end humility. God signs gavel before trending. Resentment reply. Prayers trade positions and purposes where humiliation no longer podium but safe alley privacy. She saw fruit, and fruit started walking, not trending. Fruit has no microphones. Fruit has roots. Roots bow podiums later. "This is not another economy algebra," Olivia whispered in prayer night, softly roaring after workshops. First events humble, not revenge. Executive humility has courtrooms, not protocol. Apartment bill stacks, town whispers, Hertz seasons, chairs, Pascal vendors collapse echo. Bohair arrays, and trembling florist budgets light enough for divine pivot scripting. She was not scared his change was shallow. She was scared God was working with both of them without wasting their bruises. Bruises can be classrooms if heaven agrees to narrate. Heaven was narrating. The second investor did not clap for speeches. He clapped for identities turned into sanctuary roots. Theodore Lancaster never expected to bow, until bowing turned into his only safe strategy. Socially irrelevant mentoring meetings resumed. Heaven registered not revenge but altar auditing repentance. Investors filed betrayal in a kneeling, non-contagious, strong final word revision. The town saw question marks. God saw appointments. Appointments crack mic-proof protocols until humility breath catches timelines until mid-evangelical marketing meetings. Younger tears speak before trending. Theodore looked at Olivia one afternoon, after a long quiet pause during the 7th project meeting. He did not rehearse a speech. He rehearsed courage. If God wants it slow, it will grow sovereignly without microphones, he said, repeating her earlier teaching. Positions do not bow by revenge, they bow by acknowledgement, she answered softly as she tied an old apron ribbon around her waist. No sponsorship gatherings, no budgets, no apologies, but heaven-stable deadlines. Truth booths canceled endorsing revival. Kentucky accordingly closed her eyes, trembling on Bible pages. Vendors bet betray budgeting. Barrett peeling in Chicago Riverbank, USA. God's reframing was not human metrics. It was heart timing. One evening, the local influencer who posted the photo returned to delete it, confused by the lack of reaction his accusation received. "Charge me if I step over your boundaries again," Theodore whispered originally from stage. "I won't," Olivia answered gently, "because my heart already kneeled to God about this long before you read your first Bible page." He exhaled nervously, hearing an answer that wasn't applause or protocol. It was truth. Truth does not need volume, it needs permanence. She had permanence in God. He was finally learning to taste permanence without crowns. Theodore closed the shop quietly that evening, handing keys back. No grand speech, only presence. Presence is violent against pride when pride tries to implant justification economically while heaven invests souls. Positions require microphones. Identity requires altars. And altars had not been his language for a long time, until now. Olivia prayed quietly that night, but her quiet was not weak. It was a fortress of boundaries, scripture, and identity forged inward, surrendered upward, and unveiled in heaven's timing. Theodore didn't just disappear from that stage. He returned carrying absence without applause until God flipped microphones inward enough for alternative future resumed beyond ego shame, trending lives where wounds bleed softly. Boundaries honored sanctuary Hindu vintage by vendors, stronger gospel microphone less sanctuaries. He was finally reading that humility was his only safe report aloud. The 7th workshop ended small socially but big spiritually. Participants hugged her name, humbled by God's pen more than Theodore's pride. Exhibitors revival, evangelican markets, boardrooms, benches, gospel Pascal gloved hearts. She was becoming radiant by bruises he did not plague her. Narrative simply honored the God who had started the work. Work does no need applause. It needs appointment. Appointment had returned. The town assumed forgiveness was a romance she was not yet practicing with Theodore publicly. God was practicing audit precedents inwardly, shiny lie-like church. Forgiveness was practice. Trust was schedule. And promise was not penmanship. Penmanship belonged to God first microphone. This road had no applause yet, but it had fruit. Roots, chairs, boundaries, revival, coffee, dust, vendor. That evening, Olivia stared at the riverbank where she had once released her testimony upward, saying, "God, I won't become tombstone of shame. Make this a classroom of permanence, Return collapsed inversor Atten Bible budgets partnerships flopped towns. Social ephemeral theology altar. Auditing first proud. Coupled socially irrelevant but existentially. Heaven archived chairs. Not revenge, while hearts pleaded bravery. Not coronation collapse but justification fully. iPlant was not trap trending no enemies but God cornering his safe emotional shelters where repentance times, but you cohort of her faith received notoriety. Lemma reversed schedules, slow gavel without applause. The line ended not as termination but as divine scheduling justice resumes roots, not headline. Reconciliation emerges bruises. God invests identities. Timeline vivent. Story revision. The river carried her reflection. Calmer now. But calm does not mean finished. Calm means strengthened. Strengthened means repositioned. Repositioned means God was not just editing her wounds. He was publishing them with purpose. Purpose does not ask crowds for permission. Purpose asks God for signatures only. Meanwhile, Theodore carried evidence that life had humiliated him enough. Not enough to destroy him, but enough to examine him. Examination is mercy wearing heavy boots. He had walked through nights thinking the fall was his ending. But in heaven, endings don't crown pride. They test identity. Identity was now the only crown he feared losing for good. Fear of losing identity is the birthplace of surrender. One night, while stacking chairs at the community hall, Olivia found a letter slipped under the café door. A worn envelope, messy handwriting, ink-smudged courage. She recognized the signature at the bottom. Theo. No titles before it. No crowns inside it. No arrogance decorating the paper anymore. Just a man admitting he had broken something human applause could never rebuild. She unfolded the letter alone in the back of her shop, heart braced but curious. He wasn't careful not to romanticize his apology this time. He wrote like a man documenting his heart's fall, not his empire's. I mocked your faith because I thought it exposed your weakness, the letter read. Life exposed mine instead. For the first time, I know God was not laughing with me. He was grieving with you. Olivia swallowed, eyes shimmering but head steady. She didn't feel anger, only weight. Weight is honest evidence. Evidence leads to testimony. Testimony is courtroom proof with no applause. The crowd had humiliated her. God had archived her altar. Theodore had humiliated her voice. Life had archived his collapse. The next morning, when the cafe opened, Theodore was already outside, waiting. He wasn't holding flowers this time. He wasn't holding coffee either. He was holding silence that felt like humility, not hesitation. When Olivia unlocked the door, their eyes met without protocol again. Protocol had never saved either of them. God was saving both carefully now. Did you read it? He asked, voice quieter now, like a man who knew what questions cost. Olivia nodded. One slow tilt of the head. 7 echoes of truth between them. I did, she answered gently. It didn't feel decorated. It felt surrendered. And surrendered truth is something God can finally do something with. He exhaled slowly, as if breathing back in parts of himself he'd once exiled. That day the cafe looked the same socially, but spiritually, it carried a new verdict. Humility over pride, roots over resume, God over applause. Neither of them mentioned love that morning. They mentioned truth first. Truth is aggressive against pride when pride has no microphone left. Microphones were gone now. Then what now? He asked, fingers tracing the edge of his cup. The edge was her boundary, the cup was his testimony. Olivia took a breath, aware that breathing was obedience too. I don't know the future personally, but I know the shepherd who does, she answered softly. And if we walk it, it will be slow, surrendered, honest. Theodore nodded. I don't want a fast God. I want a final God, he murmured quietly. The future, for the first time, felt like something that belonged more to heaven than to memory's violence. But not gentle violence, healing violence. The associate who once offered him crowns was gone. Crowns would not return. Character was returning. Character is loudest when no one else speaks. That afternoon, Olivia stood at the flower vendor's stall by the river, picking out the cheapest blooms. Instinct, not insult now. Insult had been his crown. But insult is not legacy when God denies endorsement. Olivia Parker would later realize God had been writing. Writing does not ask crowds for protocols. Thank God for a future that starts with truth, not protocol. Theodore whispered inwardly as he wiped tables with a faded cloth. Maybe God is not done with our bruises. Olivia told him softly that night in prayer, fingers tracing Bible pages. Bruises aren't tombstones anymore. They're classrooms if heaven agrees to narrate. Heaven had agreed, silently aggressively, weeks earlier when she forgave Theo. Thank you for believing I could be more than applause. He surrendered to her Siltica vendor, candle-lit lamp fort pan, slow door meeting, settlements, tear illegible envelope, no trending. Not trending, but chapel. Character is not archived by protocols. Character is archived by God. You can silence a stage, but you can't silence an altar. Olivia whispered one evening. Well, God silences ego and history falls like dust, he admitted internally. If God wants me here, I won't run again. Olivia nodded, remembering that nodding is a sentence too, a surrendered sentence. Forgiveness was easier in unwatched hallways years earlier. Now forgiveness had witnesses in the cheapest flowers and small daily negotiations. Negotiations involve not crowns, only gospels. Gospel confronts pride when pride has no mic anymore. Theodore would bow slowly, carefully, daily. Daily bowing does not scream. It positions. For a moment, Olivia thought the story between them was distraction, not redemption. But redemption wears quiet boots. You can't disqualify God's workshop, she murmured one night. Thank God for a future that bows, he said internally. Not expansions of public identity, but identity folding inward until humility speaks. That is why she did not push him away anymore, because purpose had never been about romance. Now, it was about rewrite. One evening he showed up for a new project meeting, ready to carry water for those who once thought crowns were permanent. Her wound had no tears this time. But tears are not trending. Altars are kingdom. The mentor investor frowned, seeing both collapse and character. I will not pretend apology is currency anymore. Currency is testimony, Theodore whispered. His voice was not doom. His voice was drafted. The café project became improbable for many. Except for heaven. Heaven was building a new schedule between them. Schedule with no crowns, no suits, no applause, only humility for 16 AA'd sign, stamping forgiveness, not because he asked for a heart, but because the corridors of heaven are long, softened, wrestler-tested, identity-begged rewrite loudly inward. And this chapter ended not with romance, but with proof that humility is louder than applause, and reconciliation is louder than stages. It ended with a small fenced future table, surrendered upward bouquet of flowers, dripping rain without suits bleeding, but planted again by God. Pen now taken, not Jacoa Greek. Olivia thought forgiveness ended the night she prayed it through. Theodore thought redemption began the day consequences finally reached him. But God was rewriting both stories at the same time. Slow, steady, unfiltered, undefeated. She healed without revenge, held boundaries like scripture, and refused to let shame name her. He fell from every spotlight he built his ego on, tasted silence for the first time, and finally found a Bible thicker than his resume. Not a perfect man, a surrendered one. By the riverbank at golden dusk, their paths met again, not to resume pain, but to revise purpose. Apology became presence, presence became fruit. Fruit pointed upward, upward bowed crowns of pride into classrooms of truth. There was no microphone left between them, only honesty signing his rise after the fall. She did not trust his old self, but she watched his new one walk slowly into obedience. He did not demand friendship or love. He respected the pace of truth repentance requires. She respected that too, more than she expected. In this ending, forgiveness didn't need decoration. It needed daily footsteps. Reconciliation didn't need noise. It needed God's timing. And God's timing finally lifted shame off her face and pride off his voice without wasting either wound. For the first time, Olivia looked up at Theodore and saw a co-laborer, not the man from the stage, For the first time, Theodore looked at Olivia and saw identity, not economy. That was God publishing the reversal both had begged for in prayer separately and painfully together. Their story did not end with revenge, nor with quick romance to anesthetize old wounds. It ended because God denied duplicate endings without identity rewritten first. And though she had forgiven him long before he returned, she realized something even deeper now. She turned toward God with a breath steadier than crying and whispered, "Lord, now you write. I will walk what you sign." Heaven smiled at that rise, not trending publicly, but burning eternally. If this story touched the part of you still healing, still remembering, still scared to trust again, lift your eyes now. Subscribe to Read Med Hearts, because God still writes second chances aggressively slow and beautifully final. Like this video, comment, "God gets the final word," and share it with someone who needs to believe that redemption can rewrite even humiliation. See you in the next story, where grace becomes camera and faith becomes legacy.